So I just joined the new data team today. I'm still learning everyone's names, still figuring out where the good coffee is, and I just got my first real task. Can you figure out which merchant risk tiers are generating the most revenue? The problem? I have no idea what I'm looking at here. Let's see if Ultimate Code can get me from 0 to useful before my next stand up with my boss. Okay, so inside of Ultimate Code here, you can see I did my normal hellos, as you should to all your LLMs. Very, very important. You got to get them on your good side. And then I asked kind of what is NovaPay, which is where I work, and this is the data that we're looking at here. So it breaks it down to like what it does. Merchants sign up with NovaPay to accept payments from their customers. How does it makes money? Who its customers are? What the data covers? Compliance angle, so on and so forth. There, all good information, especially if you're just starting in a team. Kind of gives you all the information so that you know. Kind of know what's going on there. So it says, is there anything specific about the business or data model to dig into? So I'm just going to say, so I just joined the data team, and this is my first time looking at the data. I'm going to ask it to walk me through walk me through the project structure. Like what data sources do we have? What do the staging and mart layers look like? And what kind of business questions can I answer? So that should give me a good start here. And of course, we already have a question from our boss that we want to answer, but this just will give us a nice little start here. So, it's telling us, hey, I already did a full exploration of this. So yeah, it's going to give us a project walkthrough here. So, what is this project? So it's a DBT and DuckDB analytics stack for NovaPay, a payment processing platform for online merchants. So the project follows a classic 3-tier medallion architecture. So raw seed, staging, intermediate, and marts. And just a small note here, obviously this is using DBT and DuckDB. You don't have to use DBT. You can just use your warehouse. And I'm using DuckDB, but this will work with any of your data warehouses. This is an open source tool, so we work with all of these platforms. So if you don't use DuckDB, it's okay. You can use any database that you want. So has a tech stack here as well. All right, moving on here. So data sources. So everything starts from CSV seeds loading into raw schema. So here's 8 core tables covering 2 years of data from 2024 to 2026. So you have raw merchants, which it's a core entity with company name, state, MCC code, risk tier, PII, so on and so forth there. Raw Stripe payments, raw subscriptions, raw dispute, raw events, raw marketing campaigns, raw marketing touches, raw support tickets. It tells us the number of the rows, and of course, what's even cooler about this is it tells us what it contains, all the way down to channels, spend cents, impressions, clicks, category priority created at, so on and so forth there, right? A lot of good data. And it's telling us we don't really have to guess what's in these source tables anymore. We kind of know at this point, which is great. So, all right, moving on. So then the 3 model layers. So the staging has, it's just the one-to-one wrappers over raw sources, which is pretty normal in your DBT projects. So going from the raw Stripe transactions to staging transactions, so on and so forth there. We'll skip over that. Intermediate, which are materialized as tables. So these join staging models together and encode business logic. So building blocks from marts. So analysts obviously don't generally query these directly. And so we have our intermediate merchant transactions that joins transactions and merchants. Intermediate merchant MRR, which joins subscription and merchants, which is the MRR foundation. Intermediate dispute enriched. So obviously disputes enriched with transaction and merchant context, so on and so forth there, right? Last but not least, we have our marts. So these are materialized as tables as well. So these are for BI tools and stakeholders. So we have mart daily transactions with transaction level grain. Mart fraud risk, which is merchant transactions and dispute signals. Mart merchant health, MRR churn risk, dispute rate per merchant. And then Mart merchant 360, which is full merchant view with PII. Lives in Mart PII and is SOC 2 governed, so on and so forth there. So then it has business questions that we can answer today. So like, what's our transaction success, failure, and refund rate? So it tells us where to look. So on and so forth there. We have some good questions. So if you're just kind of getting started and want to explore this data, obviously you can ask your own questions and figure it out. But sometimes if you're just new and starting, you just don't even know the questions to ask in a data set to get some context on what's going on. So these are, eight or so questions there that you can answer and get some answers today, which is really great. So, and it even tells us like data exists, but marts are incomplete. So, there's some things that are missing. So there's some opportunities here if you're new to the team to like go fix some things and make the data models better, which is great. And then, of course, we have some elevated access here and some PII things to know, too. So, anyways, we have some known issues to be aware of as well. And then, of course, the big picture is kind of the full breakdown here of CSV seeds into raw schema, staging layer, intermediate, mart, and then to our BI tools and stakeholders. So, all good stuff there, right? And so now we're going to dig into the question that our boss sent us on Slack. So if you remember from our Slack message, our boss asked us, can you figure out which merchant risk tiers are generating the most revenue? So I'm going to type that out. So can you figure out which merchant risk tiers are generating the most revenue? Perfect. So we got our question. I'm going to send this off, and then we'll bounce back in when we have the answers generated from Ultimate Code. All right, so jumping in here, so it says, let me look at the actual data before writing anything. So you can see it's like doing a sample transaction data to see columns and values, simple merchant data. And so it says, hey, like good, I can see that the amount sent in the transactions and risk tier in the merchants. So, it's asking, it's thinking about what revenue actually means here, whether it's the amounts sent, and, it should also filter that status that's exceeded. So it's not giving you the money amounts that things failed on, which is good for your revenue, right? And so you can see here's the query that's running to actually get this information. So it says got the numbers, and then it's, it's just making 100% sure that each tier's merchants are actually transacting at all. So all good to go there. So here's the results. So revenue by merchant tier risk. You can see risk tier low, medium, high, merchants, active, total revenue, percent of revenue, and then revenue per merchant. So we obviously have the most merchants in the low risk tier, and it's generating 124-ish thousand, and which is 73% of the revenue. But what's really important about this is looking at this revenue per merchant, right? Because what we're seeing here is that we have a massive difference in merchants between each tier level. So we can see that we get the most revenue overall for low because we have the most merchants there. But it's also the highest revenue per merchant, which is really important for our business there, right? And that's what it's telling us here as well, that low-risk merchants dominate the revenue because it's 73% of it, being a larger group. So, there's 7x more of them than the high risk. And then the more interesting is the revenue efficiency per merchant, which is what I mentioned before, and that the high-risk merchants aren't inactive. So their 62.6% activation rate is actually marginally higher than the medium risk. So they're transacting at a similar rate. They're just generating less revenue per transaction, and NovaPay has fewer of them by design. So that's day one. I went from completely new to this project to actually delivering useful insights in 20 minutes or so. Ultimate Code scanned the repo, connected to the warehouse, indexed the schema, and helped me understand what I was looking at without having to bug my new teammates every 5 seconds, which, if you ever started a job, it happens sometimes, right? If you're joining a new data team or just want to move faster in DBT or just your overall data engineering work, check out Ultimate Code. Link in the description. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the channel to see more on Ultimate Code and our Ultimate platform overall. See you next time.